Hello Guardians, Eido here. In this video, I wanted to take a look at a few traditional Eliksni stories. These stories seem to be mainly folktales and fables told to new generations of Eliksni to teach the ways of life or valuable life lessons. With the 2021 Solstice of Heroes event, we got new Solstice armor, and each piece of the Warlock armor set is the story of Eido, the Scribe of House Light and the daughter of Mithrax, telling various stories to a group of hatchlings, and I'd like to go over them with you today. The Sixarmed Hatchling. Eido gathered the hatchlings around her. It was late in the day, and she was reluctant to let them roam the streets at night. So she enticed them back to camp with the promise of old Eliksni legends.
"There was once a hatchling," she began, once they had quieted down, "who was born with 6 arms.
Eido used her upper arms to point out the spots below her lower arms.
And all of his clutchmates mocked him for it."
The hatchlings murmured knowingly. Many of them had experienced mocking.
"When the hatchling became old enough, he competed against his siblings for ether and status in his house. He was not as clever or as strong as his clutchmates, even with an extra pair of arms, so the Kell of his house declared him a dreg."
The hatchlings nodded knowingly. They had heard stories of dregs, too, even if Mithrax had outlawed the practice in House Light.
"But,"
Eido continued, her tone lifting,
"when it came time for the Kell of his house to dock his lowest arms, the hatchling rejoiced."
She threw her hands up in celebration.
"For he had an extra pair of arms to give. That day, he became the only dreg in the house with 4 arms, and he was proud."
The Shank with Bad Spirit. Eido looked over the hatchlings assembled at her feet. As she scanned their rapt faces, she noticed the unrepaired Shank, languishing on a workbench nearby. That reminded her of a story.
"There was once an engineer who was the cleverest in her house," she told the hatchlings. "Even more clever than Clyfix," she added.
The hatchlings chittered in mirth.
"One day, the engineer's Kell came to her with an order. He told her to build a Shank."
Eido's tone conveyed the ordinariness of such a demand.
"A simple Shank for patrolling and running diagnostics." This was an easy thing for one so clever, but the engineer was offended.
Eido clenched her fists, miming indignation.
She demanded to know why she should waste her time on such a simple task.
Eido deepened her voice in her best imitation of her father.
"I am leaving for battle soon," said the Kell, "and I want the best Shank in the system to guard my dwelling while I'm away."
The hatchlings shrieked with glee at the scribe's irreverence.
So the engineer set about building the Shank. She was given the finest tools, the finest metals, and even a skilled assistant. Everything she could ever need.
Eido's tone darkened.
But inside, she was angry. She resented her duty and wished to work on something more impressive.
Eido paused, watching the hatchlings for their reactions. It was always fascinating, she thought, to see which eyes held sympathy for the engineer and which did not.
In time, she finished her work. The Kell left for battle, and the Shank was set to patrol the Kell's dwelling, she continued. To everyone's surprise, it bumped into walls, gave incorrect diagnostics, and often turned up in places it shouldn't.
The hatchlings were rapt.
"The engineer quickly realized what was wrong,"
Eido told them, taking on a low, conspiratorial tone.
"She had given the Shank the wrong spirit. All her anger and pride had poisoned it, like dark ether poisons the scorn."
Eido watched one hatchling seize the nearest hand of another. She could end the story there, but a glance at the human sentinels watching their gathering from the lip of the roof above steeled her resolve to continue.
"One day,"
she continued gravely,
The poor Shank got so turned around, he mistook the Kel's hatchlings as intruders, and shot them dead.
The hatchlings gasped. Eido imagined she saw one of the humans' faces soften in sympathy.
When the Kel returned, he learned what had happened. He docked all of the engineer's arms, and destroyed the Shank.
Eido's voice was firm.
The house had lost their best engineer, their strongest hatchlings, and their most expensive Shank, all at once. Remember, she warned, we must give our best spirit to all our tasks, even the ones we do not like.
The hungriest thrall. Eido looked over the heads of the assembled hatchlings to the great machine above. She marveled at its magnificence. Whole civilizations had been razed to the ground in its wake. Even the Eliksni, once. She turned her attention back to the hatchlings.
Did you know that the Hive do not have spirit?
She asked. The hatchlings looked at her quizzically.
It's true, she continued. Hive have worms. Big, slimy, wriggling worms inside them.
Eido flexed her fingers, causing the hatchlings in the front row to recoil. She lowered her voice ominously.
And the worms are always hungry. They force the Hive to eat more and more and more. They are never satisfied, no matter how much the Hive feed them. That's why the Hive will eat anything, even little hatchlings, like you.
Eido snapped at them, causing shrieks of dismay.
Some think the Hive will eat the whole galaxy, she said, turning her gaze back to the great machine. And when there's nothing left, they'll have to eat each other. They'll feast until there's just one lonely thrall, who will have to eat himself. And then there will be nothing,
Eido concluded softly.
Just like in the beginning.
The hatchlings were silent. Eido was suddenly very tired. The smallest Scribe. Eido loomed over the group of hatchlings, her face lit only by the glow of the ether tank's control panel. The hatchlings gripped each other's hands in fear and huddled together in safety. The scribe continued her tale.
There was once a Scribe, the smallest Scribe of his clutch. He fought for his share of dark ether, but his stronger siblings often got more than he did.
The hatchlings muttered in sympathy.
He dreamed of one day killing a guardian and showing his siblings that he was strong. Little, but strong.
Eido flexed her lower arms menacingly.
One day, a guardian came to their lair, hoping to steal their precious dark ether.
The hatchlings glanced in worry at the nearby ether tank as Eido continued.
Fickle Kel ordered the Scribes to attack. Finally, the smallest Scribe had a chance to prove his worth.
Eido leaned forward, narrowing her eyes.
The smallest Scribe charged forward, unafraid, even as his siblings were shot down all around him. He launched himself at the Guardian, and boom! The scribe shouted, clapping both pairs of hands. The hatchlings jumped and chittered in fear. Eido lowered her voice to a whisper. The littlest Scribe exploded right against the Guardian's glowing, golden armor. He succeeded in his mission. But, Eido continued, shaking her head in mocking sadness, the Guardian didn't even notice. The Scribe was too small, and his explosion made no difference. No difference at all. The hatchling whose mother was a catch. Eido surveyed her audience. The smallest hatchlings were beginning to doze off,
leaning against the lower arms of their clutchmates, but the oldest among them were eager for one more tale.
"There was once a hatchling,"
Eido began,
"whose mother was a ketch."
Several of the hatchlings exclaimed in disbelief, waking the dozing youngsters who roused to listen.
"Her egg was kept warm and safe inside the ketch's vent shaft, and once the hatchling was ready to come out,"
Eido mimed, breaking free of inside of an egg,
"the ketch landed right in the middle of a battle."
The hatchlings leaned forward, some clambering over others.
"Awoken and Eliksni traded fire,"
she continued, waving all four hands for emphasis.
"Explosions shook the ground. The banners of great houses burned. Many were lost."
One hatchling let out a thin, protracted squeak.
"But in the middle of the battle, cleaving his way through the enemy, was a vandal. He heard the ketch's call and ran towards it. When he entered the ketch, he discovered the hatchling ruling the tiny vent shaft. He took the hatchling far away from the battle and raised her as his own. He taught her the ways of the light, and in time she grew up to be a scribe for the wisest Kel in the galaxy."
The older hatchlings exchanged glances and reveled in a sort of quiet joy, a shared secret. Unlike their smaller peers, they were worldly enough to make the connection between Eido and her story.
"Remember," she concluded, "the light always provides, no matter where we come from, or who our parents are."
As we can see, the Eliksni pass down stories and lessons in the same way that humanity does. However, by getting to experience these stories, we can see how it is that the Eliksni view other races, like the Hive, and their thoughts on humanity and Guardians are especially laid bare. Their apprehension and trust in us is always profound. So thank you for joining me today. My statistics tell me that about 90% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, so remember to subscribe if you haven't already. The best way to let me know you enjoy my content is to leave a like on the video or a comment down below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.